There's a moment that changes everything, not when they leave, not when they come back, not even when they lose control. It happens later, much later, when things are quiet, when you're no longer reacting the same way, when the intensity fades just enough for you to finally see clearly. And what you see is not what you expected, because this is the moment you realize something uncomfortable. Something most people spend months, sometimes years avoiding. It wasn't what you thought it was, not in the way you believed, not in the way you felt it. And that realization doesn't hit all at once. It builds, slowly, in pieces. At first it feels like confusion, like something doesn't fully add up. You start replaying moments, conversations, reactions. You remember things they said, things they did, and for the first time, you don't just feel them, you analyze them. And that shift alone changes everything. Because before, you experienced everything emotionally. Now, you're starting to observe it. And when you observe it, patterns appear. But at first, it doesn't feel like a pattern. It feels like coincidence, like timing, like emotions just change here naturally. Because each moment on its own can be explained. Individually, it makes sense. But when you start connecting them, that's when it changes. You begin to see the same sequence repeating, the same build, the same shift, the same distance, followed by the same return. And once you see that repetition, it stops feeling random. Patterns you couldn't see before because you were inside them. Now you're outside, and distance creates clarity. You start noticing something subtle but consistent. The timing, the way they showed up, the way they pulled back, the way they gave just enough, then took it away. And suddenly, what felt unpredictable starts to feel structured, almost designed, because there's a rhythm to it, a structure, something predictable beneath what felt chaotic. They pull away when you get closer. They come back when you start detaching. They soften when you go quiet. They intensify when you create distance. And the more you look at it, the harder it is to ignore. Because now you're not just remembering what happened. You're recognizing how it happened. And that distinction is what creates clarity. And that's where the discomfort begins. Because if it follows a pattern, then it wasn't random. And if it wasn't random, then it wasn't what you thought. At first, your mind resists that idea because accepting it means rewriting everything. Because now you have to face something deeper. If there's a pattern, then it wasn't based on connection alone. It was influenced, triggered, shaped by your behavior, which means the moments that felt spontaneous weren't entirely spontaneous. They were responses. And once you see that, it becomes impossible to unsee. Every moment that felt meaningful, every connection that felt deep, every time you believed they understood you, it means questioning all of it. And that's not easy. So your mind tries to protect you. It tells you maybe you're overthinking. Maybe they were just confused. Maybe it was real, just complicated. But then something else happens. You remember the moments that didn't make sense, the contradictions, the sudden shifts, the times when everything felt right and then suddenly didn't. And you realize something. It wasn't stable, it was responsive, it changed based on you. Not who you were, but how you showed up, how available you were, how distant you became, how much you reacted. And that realization shifts the entire dynamic. Because now it's not about understanding them anymore, it's about understanding the interaction, the push, the pull, the timing, the triggers. And once you start seeing those elements clearly, You stop getting lost in the moments. Your reactions, your availability, your distance, and that realization changes the meaning of everything. Because now it's not about what they felt, it's about what triggered their behavior. And that's a very different lens. Because something can feel real and still not be genuine. It can feel intense and still not be consistent. It can feel deep and still not be grounded in anything stable. And that's where the illusion starts to break. Not loudly, but quietly. Piece by piece, you start seeing that their attention wasn't constant. It was activated. It appeared when you pulled away. It intensified when you distanced yourself. It softened when you stopped chasing, and that pattern was always there. You just couldn't see it before because you were focused on the moments, not the timing. Now you see both, and once you see both, the story changes. Because now you're not just remembering what happened, you're comparing it, you're lining up the moments, seeing how one led into the next. And for the first time, you notice the predictability, not in what they say, but in when they say it. Not in what they do, but in when they do it. And that timing is what reveals everything. Because real connection doesn't depend on timing like that. It doesn't activate only when something is about to be lost. It doesn't intensify only when distance appears. It exists consistently, steadily, without needing a trigger. But this had triggers, clear ones, repeated ones. And once you see those triggers, you stop interpreting the moments as proof of something real. You start seeing them as responses. And that shift is what finally breaks the confusion. Because now you're not asking, did they care? You're asking, when did they choose to show it? And why? And that question is where clarity begins. Because now you're not looking at isolated behaviors. You're looking at consistency. And consistency removes illusion. Because patterns don't lie. They repeat, they reveal. They expose what isolated moments try to hide. Because anyone can show up once. Anyone can say the right thing once. Anyone can create a moment that feels real. But patterns show what's sustained, what's reliable, what's actually there. And when you look at it from that perspective, the answer becomes clearer. And consistency tells the truth. Not the highs, not the intense moments, not the emotional peaks, but the baseline, the everyday, the normal. And when you look there, you see it. And once you see it, you start anticipating it. You notice the early signs, the subtle shifts, the small changes in behavior. And instead of reacting, you pause. Because now you know where it leads. And that pause is the beginning of your detachment. Not forced, not emotional, but aware. The gap between what felt real and what actually was. And that's the hardest part, because it forces you to accept something deeper. It wasn't about you not being enough. It wasn't about timing. It wasn't about circumstances. It was about the dynamic itself. A dynamic built on reaction, on access, on control, not on stability, not on consistency, not on real emotional presence. And once you understand that, you stop trying to fix it. Because you realize there was nothing stable to fix. You were trying to hold together something that only existed in moments that felt real, but weren't sustained. And that's what makes it so confusing, because your experience was real, your feelings were real, your connection felt real, but the structure behind it wasn't. And that difference matters, because it explains everything: the inconsistency, the confusion, the emotional highs and lows, the constant questioning. It wasn't random. It was a system, a pattern, a cycle. And once you see it as a cycle, you stop personalizing it. You stop asking, what did I do wrong? And you start asking, why did this keep repeating? And that shift gives you your power back. Because now you're not stuck inside the experience. You're understanding it. And understanding creates distance. Distance creates clarity. And clarity breaks the illusion. Because once the pattern becomes clear, the illusion loses its power. Not because the moments disappear, but because they no longer mean the same thing. You're no longer interpreting them emotionally. You're understanding them structurally. And that changes your response. You don't chase the highs. You don't collapse in the lows. You don't get pulled by the shifts. Because now you see the full picture, not just the parts that once kept you attached. And once the illusion breaks, something changes permanently. You can't go back to seeing it the same way, even if you tried. Because now you know what it actually was. You know what kept it going. You know why it felt the way it did. And most importantly, you know why it never lasted. Not because you weren't enough, but because it was never built to last. And that realization, as painful as it can be, is also freeing. Because it releases you from the loop, from the questioning, from the constant hope that things could finally stabilize. Because now you understand, it was never about stability, it was about reaction. And once you stop reacting, there's nothing left to sustain it. And that's when it truly ends. Not when they leave, not when they come back, but when you finally see it for what it is. And once you see it, you don't go back to what you believed before.